I think it's just simple.
Yeah, it's so
It's
simple.
just a
Like,
simple statement
yeah.
that could be sweet depending on how it's said,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a reality that I can entertain sometimes and be very comforted by those statements. But then again, it's taking away from the experience of everything in between. Everything in between is what's real. You know what I mean? Like the high of the high and the lowest of the low. Like the in between is where like it's at. So it's not acknowledging the beauty of that. But I understand the need to like elevate and raise an experience when you're dealing with so much for so long. So.
And then who was feeding us this information
Right.
as well? It's crazy because it's like this praising of kings and queens is a very like Euro mindset, right?
Yes,
like
it
it's
is.
not
Yeah.
like Africans have like mothers and like storytellers, griots of the tribe and community that they praise and look toward for guidance and stuff like that. Spiritual leaders and stuff, not necessarily kings and queens,
Right.
but for us to adopt that in this
Mm-hmm.
in this diaspora.
Yeah,
That's
I
wild.
was just gonna bring that up because I've actually been thinking about this, but in terms of like jewelry, like you said, like bling and like, you know, just a lot of us wearing like gold from youth and, you know, just the abundance of gold that was on the continent where it was such a commodity essentially, you know. But I think about also to the different roles that people play within society before, you know, we've had these extremes of like super rich and super poor, you know, in pre-colonial societies as well. Like that is always super interesting to me, where it wasn't the kings and queens who were held on these pedestals, but it was like high priestesses and warriors and people who shed blood and people who died for very specific reasons and causes. And to me, that's always like the more appealing sort of like, you know, realm of, you know, what to uphold a person, because technically within royalty, like it's not much you really do. Like,
Yeah, it's kind of boring. That's what I said. It's
Yeah.
not real. You
Yeah.
sit around wearing uncomfortable clothes.
Yeah.
Everybody looks at you.
Yep.
You can't go outside.
Yeah.
And you're credited with all these things.
want
Yeah.
Like
You don't do
there's
anything.
no
You have no real power over anything.
There's no substance. So I do agree it is a very Eurocentric mentality to
Yeah.
uphold these things that look great but mean nothing.
Yep.
Our whole construct.
That's why I brought up the idea of like America's obsession with like Queen Elizabeth and like that whole thing, because like they harbor all this wealth and like their own ancestors are responsible for a lot of like other what's the word I'm looking for, like they're responsible, yeah, but like done to like black people. So
I will
particular.
say within
You know,
that though, I'm sorry.
no, it's okay, but I just think it's weird, like we're not all of us, but like America itself, like we're very like obsessed with like them, but and then their countries are very obsessed with them too, but like they don't do much for anyone but have all of this like abundance of wealth and like, you know, wear like really fancy like jewels. And
I also think religion has played, well, a lot of the major religions that are practiced, I would say, here, especially Christianity, and I can't speak on it with a lot of knowledge because that's not my cosmology, but like this sense of like hierarchy and all this stuff is really rooted in like the structure of the church, and you think about like Eurocentric like queens and the castle, and there are these figures that are like almost untouchable. And I yeah, it's just really romanticizing not suffering, but it's not acknowledging that that's just part of humanity, and it's like putting these people almost in the level of gods. Like, what is a god, you know? That was a half thought.
no, it's
I just
okay.
wanted to put that out there.
It's okay.
No, I was also gonna say like within reverence, because like my parents are from, like Belize was colonized by the British, and like I'll just hear my grandma talk mad shit about, you know, Queen Elizabeth, like in the best way possible, and just like this sort of like thing to attain to is just like deep rooted colonization, you know what I mean, where it's like the queen and we speak this and form and standard and blah blah blah, and it's just like, sis, she's taking all your money. Like, you know, all your money. That's all the only thing. Like, I don't even think royalty equates money a lot of the time, but Yeah, no, I mean, it's always just really interesting for me to think about, even in terms of like, you know, how we adorn ourselves and, you know, the care that I think like sometimes I think people bring, because like honestly, the only people I hear about this king, queen, empress, emperor, good morning, beloved, sunshine, like whatever.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, queen. And I'm just like, cool. But yeah, are usually people I think who are really wanting to like draw these lines of like, we're better than that, like let's be uplifted as people. So I do think in some ways, you know, I used to feed into it a lot. Like it is, you know, inspiring in some ways, but it's also like you said, I feel like the other members of society, like to be a peasant, that's incredible to me. You know, to be a warrior, that's crazy. You know, to be someone who was even a bookkeeper, you know, and you know, that's such an important thing. You're a history keeper right there. Like griots also equally as important through oral history and generational understanding, but like to see records and like just different facets and different relationships that people have and can embody, you know, to
people
me,
are
that's
praised
so
for different
fascinating.
things. It wasn't just one central figure. It was like everyone was praised for something different because you all played a viable role in your community. So it makes me think about that when we go back to the first question of community, where instead of having some central hierarchical thing of like, this is who we worship, it was more like, no, like everyone plays a role in the upliftment and the togetherness of a community. Like if we can look within maybe our own communities, like there are certain people that I'm not related to, but that like I hold to like high esteem because they do something for my community. Or I think of like Miss Jennifer holding this space for us to have this, like, and this is in Harlem, like that's a member of the community, that's an elder that's doing something for the community. Like everyone plays a different role versus like, and those people are more important, I think, than like the kings. And like I never resonated with being called empress or being, because I don't see myself in that regard. So it was always just very weird when like other people would then greet me and I'm just like, I don't know if I should greet you that way because I don't really feel like I don't know if you want to hear that back because I don't even really relate to that. But just, you know, everyone's saying something and it's just like, you know, there are a multitude of people within these communities, within these tribes, within Africa, that, you know, hold a certain regard and that are treated a certain way because they do something for their own community, and it's seen as important, not just because you have this like abundance of wealth and like, you know, servants at your feet. It's like, no, like you actually are bringing something to the place that you live. So I feel like we're gonna like kind of go all over the place, but it just made me wanted to think back to like of the diaspora, so outside of Africa. Oftentimes we'll talk about what it is that we actually like want. And I know a conversation that we had before we had started filming was you had brought up like reparations, and that's something that I do hear often and not something that I myself have studied enough, but I do know that like, you know, one of those things that we feel like of the diaspora that we need are like reparations. So it's this idea of like, well then like what does that really look like? Because you had also brought up a really interesting point that like, how do you navigate who gets those reparations? Because like you had said earlier, there are overarching themes that all Black people can relate to, but there then are like smaller individual groups of Black people that may not necessarily work for. So like, how do we navigate that? And there are, like you said, there are probably people doing the work and having these conversations, but like when we do talk about like we need reparations, and it's just like, okay, what does that mean? What does that look like? Like,
I think now that we've had some time for that idea and question to marinate through our conversation, because we had a conversation before the conversation, I think that it's a notion of distributing certain things that will put everybody on the same page, so that essentially we have our needs met, a very, you know, normal, like I wouldn't say essential, yes, essential needs are met, so then we can focus on, you know, tending to all of our gifts. Like we all have so many gifts, and if we're not in, you know, survival mode, we would be very overarching. We would be somewhere where we're not right now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, we think about money, obviously, and and like I said before, we're thinking about land. I'm thinking about like being able to go back to a country in the same, in a similar model to like the birthright model from Israel. But I think that we really have to think about what it is that we want, and what are the specific steps that we can take to fill certain essential needs. Like where I'm from, the place we are romanticizing all the time, Africa, like the average person is not making more than $1 a day and like doesn't have clean water. So I think it's important to think about how we can use our very natural resources and go from there.
Mm-hmm. What do you think? I'm curious.
Everything you said was just like hitting, like it was completely, yeah. Cosign, like.
Thank you.
Publish that one, yeah, because it's, yeah. Adding on, I feel like, I do look to Israel for a little bit of guidance of how to make it work, because I just try to find like, a functional mode of reparations where like where it was okay, and Israel, the Jewish community definitely, I think they were really successful at getting reparations, with getting other countries to help implore their power, right, or help establish their wealth and get them on their feet. And I think just in my romanticizing of what reparation would look like, I think it would look like, a lot of European and American countries investing in Africa, right? Like I definitely hear the part of the conversation where like we also take care of like the descent, like the diaspora and black people of the diaspora, and meet them where they're at and give them their needs where they're at. But I think there's something to paying back what was stolen, right? So like there were bodies, people taken and sold from Africa, and first I think, and what did that do? Like after they took all of these hundreds of thousands of people, then they went inside and like reorganized the entire country, like, right? Africa, like I feel like it's just, I think when we're talking about reparations, I think our focus should be just like investing on allowing Africa to start getting back on its feet again, and for its first time, and not necessarily with like social influences or political influences. I'm just saying monetary. Like if these countries like could make it part of their budgets, like they have to pay back a certain amount a year, like to certain countries. I think that's what's like the main thing that's needed, because if you go, like last time I was in Senegal, I was talking to someone who's like an uncle now to me. He lives in one of my father's buildings, and everyone there is kind of like family, so it's like an uncle. He was telling me how he works for this energy company, and how it's I mean, so much corruption is going on, and he sees how like Senegal could be much better. And I mean, this is I bring him up because he's super highly educated and he has the answers for what his country needs, and like this is what he studied. I think he had like a PhD, like he was like doing really well, studied in France, and like he brought back one of the problems like to like the corruption of the country being still tied to its colonial past, right? Like in taking a deal with France or China, for example, they would go with France even though the deal costs more for the resources to build the energy stuff, right? So I think, damn, I lost my train of thought. Well, sorry guys.
No, it's okay.
I just lost my point.
I know you were mentioning like you felt like your the main thing was like monetary.
Yeah.
Like it was like building economics and reinvesting back into the continent. And you had mentioned that the colonial powers should be on like almost like a payroll. Like they should be held accountable and like should be, okay, you are mandated to pay back X amount of money per year to the continent, and you know, for that way these countries can then build themselves.
Right.
And the last thing you also had said too was that another issue that these countries may face is that although a lot of these countries may have gained independence, they still have ties to their colonial powers, and that may still like interfere with internal issues.
Yeah, so thank you for that.
No, you're welcome.
Yeah. And so the point I was just saying is that, you know, like I don't think like it's like we don't necessarily like have the answers. I think they have the answers. I feel like the people who live there are people who are there who are doing the work to figure out what the country needs and stuff like that. And I think that with monetary support, we can empower those people. Yeah, I think it would take some just reorganizing of the like governments and stuff like that. Certain people are still like paid off by their colonial powers. I think that's part of the corruption and stuff like that. So there needs to be a reworking there politically, but I think that all needs to happen internally from Africa, and I think we can also play a role in that. Like our voices can matter in those conversations, but they're not like up there to the Africans, like to the person who lives there, you know, just so we're not going back and being colonizers to them, right? Like we're like their children going back home and trying to like rebuild our house and make it bigger and better. Yeah, I'll leave it at there.
No, thank you.
I think about this question at times because I feel like we've gotten like reparations throughout various points in time, but they don't look exactly how it's supposed to be packaged and presented. So specifically, like, and this is another conversation for another time, but I think about like the Caribbean, and once those countries gained independence, they very much did the same thing as they did in, you know, throughout the continent of Africa, redistributing the land to the people there with their hierarchical like positions already set in place, and then like severe debt, like crazy debt. So I agree that it should be economic, but there are certain things that these countries simply cannot do because of how much they owe and how much that debt goes up because of how much they need these things, and they need to borrow money, and then they owe even more, and then it's like you can't even build hospitals because you have to pay off these things. You can't even get certain medical like shit.
You're
for
in
the
debt
people.
to the people that colonized you.
Right? How?
And then it's like when you really try to get out of that and like
they're
do
in bigger
things.
debts though. Like
Yeah.
They're in bigger debt.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm so confused.
So it's like you're paying their debt for their debt.
Yeah. It's like, but you colonized me, and then you helped me get back on my feet somewhat, but now I still owe you that money back.
Yeah.
I owe you that money back. And
Jamaica
it's just,
is in like, I think, billions of dollars in debt. Like, same thing. I'm not really too keen on throughout Africa.
so is Haiti.
Haiti.
I heard Haiti's debt isn't back to, I heard that, I don't know verbatim, but I heard that their debt to France is also like incredibly high. And I was just like, but that's, I don't know, it kind of just made me angry. I was like, but these people need help. Like, I mean, we all do, but I don't understand the, like, I don't know.
And realistically, like, when you think about it and how much these countries need, they're never going to get out of debt.
Of course not.
They're never.
That's the point.
Yeah.
That's why I always say, like, independence isn't a real thing. Like, yeah, like, I'm proud to have roots in Jamaica, but, like, and we'll celebrate our independence in August, but I'm like, but that's not a real, like, if you still owe money to these people and they still have some control over you, you're not really, like, independent, because, like, they still own us in a way.
Then what is independence when, like, in ultimate seek of, like, unity, right? It's like, even over, like, unity of just, like, black people, we want unity for humanity, right? Like, I mean, I want to live in like a peaceful world. I want to be able to travel anywhere in the world and feel okay, and you know.
And that's also a point I was gonna bring up too. Like within the Caribbean, they have like CARICOM. I'm not sure if they have something like that throughout the continent, but I know.
What's CARICOM? I'm not familiar.
So CARICOM is basically like a political and like social agreement throughout the Caribbean where you can like travel and like money and basically kind of like the European Union.
Okay.
But not, because we're dealing with all these things. There are people who go to all these countries and are detained because people think all Jamaicans do is smoke and sell weed, or people think people from Barbados are like liars, or like whatever type of connotation you have of these countries, like it's perpetuated within the people.
Yeah.
So it's like it means basically nothing because these people are still detained at airports and stuff like that. So within, I think about like sometimes like I hear my friends and like how excited they always are to like go to Paris or Berlin or London, and specifically Berlin. I'm so tired of hearing about Berlin.
Yeah, me too.
It was like really good though.
Everyone says it's good,
Oh.
but you have to think about the reasons why people are saying it though. Like, of course, the
Because
weed,
it's familiar.
Yeah.
But it's different. Like when people from here go back to Africa, like there's mosquitoes and like you can't just drink water from the tap, and like there's no whatever food you like, you know. It's we have just these Western connotations of like comfort and like what success should look like and what comfort is really rooted in our experience, and we have to kind of break that down and ask why and start to look at it from another side. I don't even remember what the question was.
No, it's okay.
What was it?
The original question was on reparations.
Oh,
because
yes.
That was I think one of the things that people of the diaspora that we say that we feel like we need the most. So I know you guys had brought up like different things as to like what you think it meant. I know you had your main thing you had spoken about was like land, and like that. Yeah, you had mentioned you felt like it really needed to be like money, economics, reinvesting back in the continent, and what people of the diaspora can do to reinvest, and holding European countries on like a timetable. And then you had mentioned the idea that like it could be financial, but at the same time these countries of the diaspora are also like in debt to these countries, and so what does that even really look like? But then you would also brought up a different point where it's like, okay, well then what does independence really look like? Because we say that these countries aren't literally independent, so even if they do build unity within these countries that still have ties to their colonial powers because they are in debt, then what is independence like? You know what I mean? And like, would those reparations even help them? You know what I mean? Unless we say that, okay, like let's say we bring up your idea of holding Europe and America on these like timetables of paying back these countries, then that should negate all debt. Right, like that would be the fantasy, like that would you know what I mean, like that would be the ideal, that like, okay, well if you're gonna give us reparations, if you're gonna give us money to compensate us for the stealing of our ancestors and taking us abroad, then we shouldn't still owe you money, because how can we even pay you back that money to begin with? We don't even have that money, and you're still making money off of us.
I do think that is the fantasy, and I think continuing on my thought in terms of like, as much as I would love for it to be money, that's not realistic. And I feel like if it is going to be money, it has to be things that add up to money. And that's why I bring up like education, for example, building schools, having certain programs where it's like easy access, where people can see. Like I was talking to this one guy, he's like 50 years old, in one of my classes a couple semesters ago. He was in jail for 20 years because of the 80s crack epidemic. They had a program in jail where basically he can go straight into college and already had his associates by the time he left jail. And so he came in basically, getting his bachelor's, and, he has aspirations to get his master's. Yeah, so, but him and I were talking, and there's this program also within the school that a lot of people don't know about, what he does, about like, he went to Jamaica for a full month and really got to be with the land and like with the people, because my school, Brooklyn College, I guess has some programs going on where you can go to, you know, outside of study abroad. Like, it is a part of study abroad, but I think it's like a separate sphere of that for like certain
Like
whatever.
Peace Corps or something
Yes,
like that, one of those,
yeah, one of those. And I think like if there's more programs like that where it's like people in other countries can see ways of life here and then we see ways of life there and create this like exchange that will eventually lead up to money, but from the people themselves having that consciousness, not just coming from the outside, you know, or it can be land, but people also seeing like what other land looks like so they can have that model because we have it here and they can just accelerate it on some Wakanda shit, you know, if they choose, if they be, you know, but let them make that decision. So I think having certain like exchanges so we can actually like talk and like whether that's through education or programs, which I think it can be, but you know, whatever way that can look like where it can eventually equate into land and money, because right now that's totally not possible.
I think it has to be representative of the place, and then I think that kind of goes back to the thing that we said in the beginning, that like blackness doesn't look the same everywhere. That it's this idea that like there are overarching themes, like you said, that relate, but then like it also has to be specific to those places and specific, like what is it that these places individually need and what can that look like there. It's like if it's not through education, like okay, then like what skill sets do people need, like
Right.
if it is going to be working through the land, then like establishing programs where people can learn to work the land, you know what I mean?
Water,
yeah,
like, you know?
even like teaching people like how they, you know what I mean, like certain things of like what do these places individually need, and then establishing those things within those places that the people there can like learn and like cultivate and like exchange within those places. I did also want to ask as well, because we do talk about like organizing a lot, and we did bring up before this film conversation this idea that there are a multitude of organizations that do, you know, various different things for the Black community and Black and brown communities at large, but how can we as individuals, and I think we kind of touched on this in the beginning, so how can we like harness our energy and direct that towards like viable change, you know, because there are so many different things, and oftentimes I feel like we don't always spend time having conversations of what unity looks like, what community looks like, what change looks like. So then how do you think you harness that individual energy to bring about change in whatever form it looks like?
For me, I feel like, I mean, I stress the fact that I feel like it's in cinema, in that world, for me personally, as an individual, I think representation matters so much, and I'm interested in like just I think the way media is now, I think the lens is just one of the most powerful things we have, you know, storytelling through film and cinema as a whole. I think for me that's my lane of outreach that I wanna focus on. But even in that, I personally feel like, you know, it involves a lot more just like being present in my community, you know. Like summertime is coming around, you know, like Harlem in summertime is very lively
It's
place.
my favorite time.
Yeah.
Summertime in Harlem is my favorite time.
Yeah. So like really like taking to the streets, you know, and continuing this conversation on the corners. I think that's it for me right now.
No, but that's valid though.
Yeah,
That's your individual experience.
Yeah. I feel like I wanna. Could you ask the question one more time?
Yeah, no, it's cool. I was just saying, how do we harness our energy and direct that towards like viable change?
Yeah, I think for me that's my lane for valuable change. Valuable change. Yeah.
I like that perspective a lot. I definitely, media is definitely my forte, and I've been thinking about it a lot too, because I feel like representation has been something that has been so stressed, and rightfully so. Like, we've never been able to see ourselves, but now it's like the people that we are seeing aren't like, you know what I mean? Like, they're not like these sort of like role models.
Right, they're not like ideal human beings.
Yeah, they're not ideal people.
Like,
so I feel like I hear a lot of like clapback from that in terms of like, oh my god, well this person did this thing, and like even the Jesse whatever dude from
you know,
and you know to have an all black or mostly black cast of power. And the themes
Empire.
that it touched on,
but they're similar.
Yeah,
they're very similar.
I'm like 50 Cent, one of them.
Yeah,
it's one of them. But yeah, and that whole thing, and then to see like the, you know, whatever the situation was, whatever is true, it's not whatever. It's just like to put a person on a pedestal like that to me is like somewhat dangerous. Like, you know, we begin to put people on pedestals because it's like the first this and the first that, and I've been hearing this so much within this whole like movie music like realm, like oh, this person is the first to do this and first to do that, where it's like we've had blaxploitation since the 70s, you know, and even before that we've had like
that's true. We have been making our own shit for a long time,
but
it's just that it was in our own thing,
right?
So now that it's in a white space, that's when it becomes like you get applauded for being the first. It becomes celebrated because it's in a white space versus it being like the films that we were making were solely in black spaces
for black people.
Yeah, for black people. So it's not like we can't celebrate you because you guys aren't doing that in our thing. But I know what you're saying.
And I in some ways, like in the inclusion, I have many opinions on to be inclusive and how inclusive to be, because it's a very fine line and we need to know why we're being included in the spaces that we are.
Yes.
But I find that there are a plethora and a myriad of genres and perspectives within some inclusive spaces. So having a perspective of a black gay male, for example, would not have been, you know, mainstream, so to speak, years ago. And to be included in these spaces where it's like, okay, you know, the homophobia of certain communities, you know, within the black identity, like, you know, within the mainstream construct, like those things begin to change. So I do think that like it is super important, and like for me it's more about just being as honest as possible, like definitely through like media and like talking and like being out there more, but just like in a way that is not just for like a commodification or like a usage or, you know, something that can actually be used in a thing. Because like right now I'm working in advertisement and it is everything you think it is, you know, and I think people really like to sugarcoat it. And I've noticed that's a lot of people's first jobs, like when they move to New York and fresh out of college. And like, you know, I'm working with like a lot of gentrifiers, honestly. And like, I hear their perspectives, black and white. Black people gentrify way more, which I always find very interesting, because those are usually the people who, I forget what question you asked before, but I was just thinking about like sort of like gatekeepers. And you had brought up somewhat similar, like basically people who can communicate, like, oh, you were talking about like pockets of people and like having cliques. And I've always thought in my head like the hood, the hoteps, and the intellectuals, those are usually the cliques that people break themselves into. Sometimes it's two or more. Sometimes you're
figure out what do we belong to as individuals.
And the intellectual hood, hotep, intellectual.
I do want to say this really quick on a time constraint. So so like when any other like opinions that you have, and I did want to ask a final question too. So if you ask me to like final wrap up, is like, how do you define blackness? So if we can, I know it's a huge question because it's like blackness is not a monolith and it's not like a singular thing, but whatever it looks like within your individual experience, I think is valid enough. So if we can like summarize these two and like very like concise, even though it's like incredibly difficult because it's a very like overarching, it's a very huge question, but
can I offer an answer for the last question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that generally I look at things through the lens of my interests, and that comes from, you know, like yoga and meditation and generally creating a sense of wellness and sharing that in a lot of different forms. And I think that the essence of that kind of philosophy and practice is really focused on getting people in touch with like their inner self, like past like the personalities and the structure of what their life has shown them who they are and where they belong and what they have to offer. Is just kind of digging a little bit deeper and doing some searching and maybe coming up with some clarity that is not necessarily represented to you externally. So I think that the more people kind of ground themselves. And that could look like a lot of different things. I'm not only saying like be vegan and da da da. Like, that would be fantastic, and I would love that. But like, you know,
Plug.
there's a lot of different reasons why that is difficult for a lot of folks, and I can hold space for that. But my point is that with more soul searching, with more slowing down, with more intentional community and conversations of this nature, it helps people ask questions and see like what does my energy need? Right. I feel like that was the specific language that you used for the question, is like, how do we harness our individual energies? Like, how do I take care of myself so that I can do the work?
Mm-hmm. All right, cool. So this was, I know we didn't get to like all share the final questions, but I feel like we said some really valuable, important information. And I wanted to say thank you guys for being panelists. Thank you for doing this again. I really appreciate it. This has been like my partner in crime for like the whole thing. I want to say thank you to the space and to Miss Jennifer for letting us use Sisters Uptown Bookstore. Thank you to Ricky for being the videographer and editor. And thank you to my other two guests, Kia and Kadeem. This is really special, so thank you.
Peace.
Big ups your podcast.
Yeah.